My name is Melissa Chen. I am 45 years old, and for the past 2 decades, I have built one of Houston's most respected architectural firms. People often describe my buildings the same way they describe me: bold, uncompromising, unwilling to bend for anyone. The night everything collapsed in my life, I was standing beneath the bright lights of a rooftop gala, watching my newest skyscraper reflect the city skyline like a blade of glass cutting through the night. 30 floors of steel, glass, and precision. My work. My legacy. Around me, investors clinked champagne glasses. Colleagues congratulated me. My assistant whispered excitedly that several billion-dollar funds wanted to partner with our next project. I barely reacted. Approval stopped meaning much to me a long time ago. My gaze drifted across the crowd until it landed on a familiar figure near the edge of the terrace: Howard Prescott. 6 months earlier, he had stood across a conference table and insisted my foundation design was reckless, dangerous, too unconventional. He'd tried to force a complete redesign. That morning, I learned his own luxury development project had partially collapsed during construction. 3 workers injured. I raised my champagne glass slowly and took a measured sip. People never learn, I murmured to my assistant beside me. She blinked. I never forget anyone who doubts me. At that moment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. The name on the screen softened something inside me. Daniel. My husband of 16 years. Even after all that time, seeing his name still brought a quiet warmth to a part of me that the business world never touched. I stepped away from the crowd and answered. Melissa? His voice said gently. Are you still coming to Ethan's recital tonight? I checked my watch. The performance started in less than an hour. Of course I am, I replied. I told you, I never miss what matters. And I meant it. When I was 12 years old, my own father walked out on our family while my mother was dying from cancer. I spent those years watching promises dissolve like smoke. So when I built my own life, I built it on rules, simple rules. Loyalty above everything. Protect what is yours. And never forget betrayal. By the time I left the gala and drove home to change clothes before the recital, I was thinking about how carefully I had constructed my life. My husband Daniel had always balanced me perfectly. Where I was disciplined, he was easygoing. Where I calculated every step, he moved through life with warmth and spontaneity. Our 2 children had grown up with something I never had: stability. Olivia, 21, was finishing graduate school in architecture. Ethan, 16, had inherited Daniel's gentle personality and my stubborn determination. From the outside, we were the kind of family people envied. Successful, stable, untouchable. At least, that's what I believed. Because when I arrived home that evening, I noticed something small. Something so trivial, most people would never even register it. Daniel had laid out my favorite tie on the dresser. He always did that before important family events. A simple, loving habit. But as I adjusted the tie in the mirror, something slipped from my jacket pocket and fluttered onto the floor. A receipt from an expensive downtown hotel, a hotel I had not visited in months. The date printed on the paper was only 2 days earlier. I stared at it for a moment. Then I folded the receipt and slipped it back into my pocket. There were my son's recital. So I drove to the auditorium and took my seat in the darkened theater. After the recital ended, I kissed Ethan's forehead, promised Daniel I would return home later, and drove toward the site to deal with the problem. At the time, I thought the real collapse that night would be concrete and steel. I had no idea that 3 days later, in a hospital corridor, I would discover the true structure of my life had already fallen apart. And the people who destroyed it were the 2 I trusted most: my husband and my closest friend. Before everything fell apart, my life looked like something carefully drafted on an architect's blueprint. Every line had purpose. Every structure had balance. At least, that was what I believed. I was 24 when I met Daniel Chen. Back then, I was a graduate student at Rice University, studying architecture with the kind of intensity that frightened most people. My professors used to say I treated every project like it was the only one that mattered. In many ways, it was. I grew up watching instability destroy everything around me. My mother died when I was 14, and my father had already disappeared 2 years before that. I survived those years by clinging to one idea. If I built something strong enough, nothing could ever take it away from me again. Daniel was the opposite of everything I was. Where I was methodical, he was spontaneous. Where I analyzed every decision, he followed instinct. We met during a campus fundraiser. I had been dragged there by classmates who insisted I needed to socialize more. I remember standing near the buffet table, reviewing structural sketches on my phone instead of speaking to anyone. Daniel walked up beside me and laughed. "You're the only person here studying blueprints at a party." I glanced at him, slightly irritated. "It's not a party," I said. "It's a networking event." He grinned. "Same thing, one just has worse food." That was Daniel. Warm, easy, completely unafraid of people. Over the next few months, he kept appearing everywhere in my life. Coffee shops, study lounges, late-night campus walks. Eventually, I realized he was doing it on purpose. "You plan buildings," he once told me during one of those walks, "but you can't plan people." I remember looking at him skeptically. "I don't need to," he smiled. "Everyone does, eventually." Despite my reservations, I fell in love with him. Not quickly, not recklessly, but steadily. Daniel studied marketing and business development. He had a natural talent for connecting with people, something that complemented my personality perfectly once my career began taking shape. When I started my first architectural firm project at 27, Daniel helped introduce me to investors and developers who otherwise might never have taken a chance on a young female architect with unconventional ideas. He believed in me. More importantly, he understood me. 2 years later, we got married. The wedding wasn't extravagant, but it was elegant. Clean lines, soft lighting, carefully designed architecture at the venue I had personally helped renovate. Daniel slipped the ring onto my finger and whispered something that stayed with me for years. "We'll build everything together." For a long time, that promise felt real. Our daughter Olivia was born 3 years later. Holding her in the hospital for the first time changed something inside me. For the first time since childhood, I felt something deeper than ambition. Responsibility, protection. 5 years later, Ethan was born. By then, my firm had begun gaining recognition across Texas. My designs were appearing in architecture magazines. Developers were calling me directly. Despite the long hours, I made one rule for myself. No matter what happened in business, I would never fail my family the way my father had failed us. Daniel supported that promise. He handled many of the social responsibilities that came with my career. Charity events, community meetings, school functions when my schedule became overwhelming. Sometimes he joked about it. "You build skyscrapers," he'd say. "I manage the ground floor." We laughed about it then. But looking back, I realized those years also planted the first quiet cracks in our marriage. My work demanded relentless focus. Deadlines. Investors. Construction crises. I was present for every milestone that mattered, but Daniel often carried the smaller, everyday responsibilities. School meetings. Birthday planning. Family gatherings. At the time, I believed we had simply found a balance. Now I understand something else was happening. Distance. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just subtle shifts over the years. Still, for most of our marriage, things felt stable. Our children grew into remarkable young people. Olivia followed my path into architecture, driven and disciplined. Ethan discovered his passion for dance and music, something Daniel encouraged with genuine pride. And then there was Rebecca Morrison. Rebecca entered our lives about 18 years earlier. She was a rising real estate developer when I designed my first major commercial complex in Houston. At the time, she was ambitious, charismatic, and willing to invest in unconventional architectural ideas. That project launched both of our careers. From that point forward, Rebecca became more than just a business partner. She became a close friend. Our family spent holidays together. Rebecca attended our children's birthday parties. Daniel and she shared the same easy humor that I never quite mastered. I trusted her. Completely. She was one of the few people who understood both my professional ambitions and my personal life. If someone had asked me a year ago which 2 people in the world I trusted most, I would have answered without hesitation, Daniel. and Rebecca. But trust, like architecture, depends on foundations. And sometimes foundations begin to weaken long before the structure above them shows any visible damage. Over the past year, small things started changing. Nothing dramatic, just details. Daniel suddenly began attending weekend wellness retreats every other week. He started locking his phone with a new password. Late-night text messages appeared more frequently. When I asked about them, he always smiled casually. "It's just Diane," he said, referring to his sister. "She never sleeps." I believed him. Because after 16 years of marriage, suspicion never crossed my mind. But 3 days after Ethan's recital, that trust would collapse in a hospital hallway. And when it did, I would discover that the cracks in my life had been spreading for far longer than I ever imagined. If someone had asked me when the marriage truly started to change, I would not have been able to give them a single date. There was no dramatic beginning, no obvious confession, no lipstick on a collar, no late-night phone call answered in a whisper while I stood in the doorway. No scene dramatic enough to belong in a movie. What happened instead was far more dangerous. A pattern. A slow shift in rhythm. A collection of details so minor, so explainable on their own, that I kept dismissing them. That is the worst part about betrayal, when it begins quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It settles into your life so gradually that you mistake discomfort for stress, distance for maturity, and lies for ordinary inconvenience. The first thing I noticed was Daniel's attention drifting, not away from the children, never in a way that would have made him look like a bad father. He still smiled at Ethan's performances. He still texted Olivia about her design critiques. He still remembered birthdays, school deadlines, appointments. But with me, something had changed. He was present, and yet not fully there. At dinner, he would nod while I spoke, but his gaze would flicker to his phone, face down beside his plate. At night, he would say he was tired before I had even finished washing my face. On weekends, when we should have been sharing quiet moments over coffee, he seemed restless, distracted, too eager to leave the room. One evening, I found him standing alone on the patio, staring into the dark. I slid the glass door open and stepped outside. "You're quiet tonight," I said. He turned too quickly, like I had interrupted a thought he didn't want caught. "Just tired." I leaned one shoulder against the frame. "You've been tired a lot lately." He gave me a small smile. "You say that like you're not the busiest woman in Texas." That's not an answer. For a second, his expression tightened. Then it disappeared. "It's nothing, Melissa. Just a lot on my mind." I remember studying his face in the dim patio light, sensing distance but unable to define it. "What kind of lot?" "Normal life lot," he said lightly. "You know, bills, the kids, family." Normal. That word became one of the many places he hid. Then came the weekends. Daniel had never been the type to chase trends. So when he mentioned a wellness retreat, I almost laughed. He was holding a green juice in one hand and wearing running shoes that still looked brand new. "A retreat?" I asked. "Since when do you do retreats?" He rolled his eyes with theatrical patience. "Since my wife thinks surviving on espresso and adrenaline is a valid lifestyle." I gave him a dry look. "It is a valid lifestyle. It built this house." He came over, kissed my temple, and smiled. "Maybe. But I'd still like to avoid dying from secondhand stress." It was a reasonable explanation. More than reasonable. Healthy, even. So when one weekend retreat turned into another, and then another 2 weeks later, I told myself there was nothing suspicious about a man trying to improve himself. Still, little things kept collecting in the back of my mind. A shirt that smelled faintly of a perfume I did not wear. His sudden insistence on taking calls in another room. The way he once pulled his phone out of my line of sight with a speed that was almost instinctive. That moment stayed with me. We were sitting in the kitchen. I was reviewing material specifications for a civic arts center, and he was scrolling through messages. A notification flashed across his screen. I did not see the name, only the beginning of a sentence. "Can't stop thinking about last." Before the rest appeared, Daniel turned the phone face down. Too fast. I lifted my eyes slowly. He smiled, but it arrived half a second too late. "Diane," he said. I said nothing. He reached for his coffee cup, as though the explanation settled everything. I returned to my work, but the words on the page blurred. That night, as I lay awake beside him, I listened to his breathing and asked myself a question I hated. Was he lying to me? I did not want the answer. So I did what many people do when truth becomes inconvenient. I chose patience over confrontation. A few days later, Rebecca came by the office. She entered my conference room carrying 2 coffees and the sort of bright, effortless energy that always made people relax around her. "For the most overworked architect in Houston," she said, setting 1 cup in front of me. I took it with a faint smile. Trying to soften me up before asking for budget concessions? "Please," she said, taking the seat across from me. "You've been impossible for 18 years. I know better than to try charm now." That was our rhythm. Sharp, familiar, built over years. We reviewed project updates, permits, investor concerns. At one point, she asked casually, "How's Daniel?" The question should not have stood out. She had asked about my family countless times before. Still, something in her tone made me pause. "He's fine," I said, watching her. "Why?" "No reason." She lifted one shoulder. "Just haven't seen you 2 at dinner in a while." I studied her face. "You miss my terrible company?" She laughed. "I miss watching you terrify waitstaff who misuse the word structural." That pulled a small smile from me. But when she left, the unease remained. Not because she had done anything wrong, because for the first time, I noticed how often Daniel mentioned Rebecca lately. Nothing direct, nothing inappropriate, just references. Rebecca said the market downtown is shifting. Rebecca thinks mixed-use projects are going to dominate the next 5 years. Rebecca's assistant recommended that restaurant. At the time, it all sounded natural. We were professionally intertwined. Our families knew each other well, but suspicion changes memory. Once it enters your bloodstream, it rewrites the past in sharper ink. Around that same period, Olivia started making comments I almost ignored. She was home one Sunday afternoon, sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open, red marking one of her graduate design drafts while I reviewed site elevation notes. Daniel had just left for another retreat. Olivia watched the front door close and frowned. "Dad's gone a lot lately." I kept my eyes on the plans. "He's doing those wellness weekends." She snorted softly. That sentence still sounds fake. I allowed myself a small smile. "You're not wrong." She hesitated, then said, "Have you noticed he's weird with his phone?" My pen stopped moving. I lifted my head. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, suddenly cautious. "Nothing, just weird. Like a teenager trying not to get caught doing something." I held her gaze for a moment too long. She noticed. "Mom," she said carefully, "I'm not accusing him of anything." Neither was I. Not out loud. So I gave the answer mothers give when they are trying to calm their child while also calming themselves. "He's probably stressed." Olivia leaned back in her chair. "Maybe," but she didn't sound convinced. Neither was I. Then came the hotel receipt. Once I found it in my jacket pocket, everything I had been suppressing began to rise to the surface. The receipt itself was simple. 1 bar charge, valet parking, a downtown hotel I had not visited in months. I tried to reason it away. Maybe it had been transferred by accident during a client dinner. Maybe one of the children had shoved it in my pocket absent-mindedly. Maybe it came from an old meeting and had somehow remained tucked inside the lining. All possible. All thin. I started paying closer attention after that. Not obsessively. Not yet, but enough. I noticed Daniel showered immediately after returning from those retreats, even if he claimed he was exhausted. I noticed he smiled at his phone in private and looked blankly neutral the second he entered a room with me. I noticed that when I mentioned making plans for the following month, he would answer, but vaguely, as if some part of his life was already being scheduled elsewhere. The most unsettling part was how normal he could still seem when he wanted to. He still asked me whether I had eaten lunch. He still left notes on the kitchen counter, reminding Ethan to bring his dance shoes. He still reached for my hand in public. That was what made it so poisonous. The deception lived beside the tenderness, so naturally that I began questioning my own instincts. One night, after a fundraising dinner, we returned home past midnight. I kicked off my heels near the entryway and found Daniel loosening his tie in the foyer mirror. He looked handsome, familiar, like the man I had spent 16 years trusting. I stepped behind him and met his eyes in the reflection. "Are you happy?" I asked. The question surprised him. "With us?" I added. He turned fully then, eyebrows slightly drawn. "Where is this coming from? Answer me." He exhaled, almost amused. "Yes, Melissa, I'm happy." "Then why do I feel like you're somewhere else, even when you're standing right here?" For the first time, irritation flashed across his face. "You're working 80-hour weeks, barely sleeping, carrying 3 major projects at once, and now you're asking me why things feel off?" It was a clean answer, practical, just sharp enough to make me doubt myself. "I didn't say things were off," I replied. "You didn't need to." He walked past me then, heading toward the stairs. I stood in the foyer, one hand still resting on the marble console table, listening to his footsteps fade upward. That conversation should have pushed me into action. Instead, it pushed me into silence. Because there is something humiliating about suspecting betrayal before you can prove it. You feel foolish, petty, paranoid. Especially when the person you suspect knows exactly how to make your doubt look irrational. 3 days later, Daniel came into my home office, dressed for what he called a book club meeting. A book club. The phrase almost made me laugh. He stood in the doorway, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, avoiding my eyes just enough for me to notice. "I'll be back around 9, he said. I looked up from the blueprints spread across my desk. "This is your 3rd book club this week." His smile faltered for the briefest second. "Diane organized a special reading series. 3 nights in 1 week?" He gave a little shrug that was meant to look casual. You know how she gets when she's excited about something. I held his gaze. He held mine. Then he smiled again, softer this time, walked over and kissed my cheek. "I won't be late." After he left, I sat motionless in my chair, listening to the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway. Then I opened my laptop. Weeks earlier, after too many unexplained inconsistencies, I had done something I never imagined I would do in my own marriage. I installed a tracking app on his phone. I had told myself it was a contingency, a precaution, something I would never need. My hand was steady as I opened the map. The dot moved away from our neighborhood, away from Diane's house, toward downtown, toward the hotel district. And as I stared at that screen, something inside me turned cold and precise. Not broken. Not yet, just prepared. Because in that moment, whether I wanted to admit it or not, I knew that whatever truth was waiting for me, it was already far uglier than suspicion. I just didn't know how much uglier it was about to become. 20 minutes after Daniel's car disappeared down the street, my phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. Normally, I would have ignored it. That night, something made me answer. "Melissa Chen speaking." There was a brief pause, followed by a professional but slightly rushed female voice. "Mrs. Chen, this is Memorial Hospital. Your husband, Daniel Chen, has been involved in a car accident." For a moment, the world narrowed into a single point of sound. I did not panic. Panic is emotional, and emotion has never been my first response to crisis. "What is his condition?" I asked calmly. "He's stable," the woman said quickly. "He was conscious when the ambulance arrived, but he's asking for you." I stood from my desk, already reaching for my coat. "Is he in surgery?" "No, minor injuries, possible concussion, but we'd like family present." Family. The word echoed strangely in my mind. "I'm on my way," I said. The drive to the hospital felt strangely mechanical. I obeyed traffic lights, changed lanes, followed directions. My mind moved through possibilities the way it would analyze a damaged building. Accident, speed, road conditions, impact angle. Yet beneath those calculations, another thought pushed forward with quiet persistence. Why was Daniel downtown? And why at that particular hotel district? When I arrived at Memorial Hospital, the emergency entrance was flooded with fluorescent light. Nurses moved briskly through the sliding doors while a paramedic wheeled an empty stretcher toward an ambulance. I stepped inside. Daniel Chen, I said to the nurse at the front desk. She began typing on her computer. Room 417, she said after a moment. But I had already started walking. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. The lighting was harsh, the kind that erased shadows but made everything feel colder. As I turned the corner toward the elevator bank, a nurse stepped directly into my path. "Excuse me," she said firmly. "Family only beyond this point." I am family. She glanced at the tablet in her hands. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the chart indicates I'm his wife." My voice was calm, but something in my expression must have made her pause. She scrolled through the chart again. Then she frowned. "That's strange." "What is?" Another woman already signed in as his spouse. For the first time in decades, I felt something unfamiliar move through my chest. Not anger, not heartbreak. Something sharper, disorientation. I stared at her. "That's not possible." She turned the screen slightly toward me. The name was already recorded in the system. Rebecca Morrison. The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. My brain rejected the information for half a second. Then everything locked into place with brutal clarity. The hotel receipt, the retreats, the phone password, the late-night texts. All of it. Without another word, I stepped past the nurse and walked toward room 417. The door was slightly open. I pushed it gently, and there they were. Daniel sat propped against the hospital bed, a small bandage across his forehead. His arm rested in a sling. Beside him, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, was Rebecca. Her hand was wrapped around his, not awkwardly. Not like someone comforting a friend. Their fingers were intertwined with the quiet familiarity of people who had done it countless times before. For a moment, no one moved. Rebecca was the first to see me. Her face drained of color instantly. Daniel followed her gaze. When his eyes met mine, something like terror flickered across his expression. "Melissa." Rebecca slowly released his hand. Too late. The image had already burned itself into my mind. A perfect photograph. The kind you never forget, no matter how many years pass. My husband, my closest friend, holding hands in a hospital room. Rebecca stood abruptly. "Melissa, this isn't..." I raised one hand slightly, not angrily, simply stopping her. Silence filled the room. Daniel swallowed. "Melissa, we were going to tell you." The words echoed strangely. Going to tell me. I studied their faces the way I study structural blueprints when searching for a flaw. Every detail mattered. Every small crack. "How long?" I asked. Rebecca opened her mouth, but Daniel answered first. "We didn't plan it." That was not what I asked. "How long?" Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched. Then Daniel whispered something that sounded like a confession, dragged out of him against his will. "Almost 2 years." The number landed in the room like falling steel. 22 months. Suddenly memories rearranged themselves inside my head. Olivia's graduation, my mother's funeral, our anniversary trip to Belize. Every moment during those 2 years had been built on a lie. Rebecca stepped forward. "Melissa, please listen." But I was no longer looking at her. I was looking at Daniel. 16 years of marriage. 16 years of believing loyalty was the foundation of everything we built. And in that moment, I understood something. The betrayal was not just the affair. It was the calculation, the lies repeated every day, the careful deception. I stood there another few seconds, absorbing the scene completely. Then I turned and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard Daniel's voice break. "Melissa, wait." I did not stop. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly ahead of me as I walked toward the exit. Outside, the night air hit my face like cold water. I sat inside my car, both hands gripping the steering wheel. My heart was beating faster than usual, but my breathing remained slow. Measured. Controlled. That was the moment my life changed. Not because my husband had betrayed me, not even because my closest friend had helped him do it, but because in that parking lot, something inside me hardened in a way it never had before. 3 weeks later, I would file for divorce. I would move into my downtown apartment above my design studio, and I would begin dismantling the life Daniel and Rebecca thought they could build on my ruin. They believed betrayal was just a mistake, something you apologized for, something people eventually moved past. They were wrong. For me, betrayal was not a mistake. It was a permanent structural failure. And once a structure fails like that, it is never rebuilt the same way again. For the first 3 weeks after the hospital, my life moved with the precision of a machine. Not because I felt nothing, but because I refused to let emotion dictate my decisions. The morning after discovering Daniel and Rebecca together, I did something very simple. I hired a divorce attorney. Her name was Nora Harrington, a woman who had represented my firm for more than 15 years. Nora was sharp, disciplined, and had long since learned that when I asked for something, I already knew exactly what I wanted. When she walked into my office that morning and saw my expression, she didn't waste time with small talk. "What happened?" she asked. "Daniel had an affair." She nodded slowly. "With Rebecca Morrison." That made her eyebrows lift slightly. "How long?" 22 months. Nora leaned back in her chair and let out a quiet breath. "That complicates things." "It clarifies them," I replied. Within 48 hours, she had begun filing the paperwork. At the same time, I moved out of the house. Not dramatically. Not in the middle of an argument. I simply packed a few suitcases, drove downtown, and moved into the apartment above my architecture studio. The apartment had originally been designed for late nights when I needed to stay near project sites. Now it became something else entirely, a place where nothing reminded me of 16 years of lies. I continued working, meetings, design reviews, construction visits. To anyone outside my inner circle, nothing appeared different. But inside my phone, there were 27 missed calls from Daniel. 27 messages. 27 attempts to explain something that required no explanation. For days, I ignored them. On the 28th call, I finally answered. "Melissa?" His voice sounded strained. "What could you possibly have to say?" There was a long pause. "Please," he said quietly, "let me explain. It's not what you think." I stared out the window of my office at the Houston skyline. I saw exactly what it was. Another silence. "How long?" I asked again, even though I already knew. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped to a whisper. 22 months. Hearing him say it again felt strangely detached, as if he were describing someone else's life. "That includes Olivia's graduation," I said evenly. "Yes." "My mother's funeral." "Yes." "Our anniversary trip." Another pause. "Yes." Each confirmation landed like another steel beam falling into place. "Melissa," he said desperately, "Rebecca doesn't mean anything to me. It was a mistake." I almost laughed. "No," I interrupted quietly. "A mistake is something you do once." My voice remained perfectly steady. "You made thousands of decisions. Every text message, every hotel room, every lie you told while looking me in the eye. Please, you chose this." The silence on the line became heavy. Then Daniel tried something else. "What about the kids?" The question almost sounded like hope. I ended it quickly. "Olivia is an adult. Ethan is old enough to understand betrayal." My tone carried no emotion. "We'll discuss everything else in court." Then I hung up. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel heartbreak. What I felt was something colder. Clarity. The same clarity I had felt when I was 12 years old and realized my father was never coming back. Betrayal doesn't break you when you've already learned how to survive it. It just reveals the truth faster. A few days later, I returned to the house I had designed years earlier. Not to argue, not to confront Daniel, simply to collect a few personal belongings. When I stepped inside, the house felt unfamiliar. The marble floors echoed too loudly. The silence carried a strange weight. I walked upstairs toward the bedroom when I heard footsteps behind me. "Mom?" I turned. Olivia stood halfway down the staircase, her expression caught between relief and anger. "You finally came back," she said. "I'm just here for a few things." "That's it?" she asked incredulously. Her voice rose slightly. 16 years of marriage and you're just walking away? I studied her carefully. "Is that what your father told you?" Olivia hesitated. Then she sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "He told me everything." "Did he?" She nodded. "He admitted the affair with Rebecca." Her voice tightened. "Yeah, it's horrible, but families work through things. They talk. They don't just disappear." I tilted my head slightly. "Did he tell you how long it lasted?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" 22 months. The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at me. 2 years? I nodded. Her voice dropped. That means during my graduation. Yes. Before she could say anything else, the doorbell rang. I walked downstairs and opened the door. Ethan stood outside. His eyes were red. Tears streaked down his face. I hate him, he said immediately, pushing past me into the house. I hate both of them. Olivia came down the stairs quickly. What happened? Ethan's voice shook with anger. I went to Rebecca's office today. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Why? She promised to help with my college applications. His jaw clenched. But her assistant said she was meeting someone. Ethan laughed bitterly. So I waited. He looked up at me. When they walked out together, they were kissing. The room went completely silent. Olivia slowly sat down on the staircase, burying her face in her hands. Ethan stood in the middle of the foyer, shaking with fury. They didn't even look guilty, he said, like it was normal. Like they weren't destroying everything. I stepped forward and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Both of them looked at me. What happens next, I said calmly, is not about reconciliation. My voice left no room for argument. It's not about forgiveness. Ethan frowned slightly. What do you mean? I met both of their eyes. I do not forgive betrayal. The words settled heavily in the room. Olivia looked up slowly. So you're just done with Dad? No, I replied. He made his choice when the affair began, and Rebecca made hers. Then I added quietly, now I'm making mine. Ethan wiped his eyes. What does that mean? I looked toward the window where the evening sunlight was fading across the quiet street. It means, I said slowly, in the coming weeks, you'll understand exactly what betrayal costs. And for the first time since the hospital, something inside me began to shift, not toward revenge, but toward consequence. Because Daniel and Rebecca believed their affair was just a private mistake. They believed time and apologies could erase it. What they didn't understand yet was that the truth has a way of rebuilding the entire world around it. And when that truth finally surfaces, everything built on lies begins to collapse. The moment you realize someone has betrayed you, you face a choice. You can collapse under the weight of it, or you can study it, understand it, take it apart piece by piece, the way an engineer dismantles a compromised structure. I chose the second. 3 days after my conversation with the children, Raymond Gallo, my head of security, walked into my downtown office carrying a thick folder. Raymond had worked with my firm for almost 10 years. Before that, he had spent 2 decades in corporate investigations. He was one of the few people I trusted without hesitation. He placed the folder on my desk. You were right to ask questions, he said. I opened it slowly. Inside were financial statements, email records, travel logs, and hotel reservations. Every document told the same story. Daniel and Rebecca hadn't been careless. They had been careful, too careful, which meant they had been planning this for a long time. How long have they been coordinating financially? I asked. Raymond flipped through several pages. About 18 months. He pointed to several highlighted transactions. Rebecca set up 3 shell companies, one registered in Aspen, one in the Bahamas, and one outside Austin near the Lake District. My eyes narrowed slightly. Vacation properties? Exit strategy, Raymond replied. They were moving money quietly, small transfers at first, then larger ones. How much? About $400,000 total between their personal accounts. I leaned back in my chair. They hadn't just been having an affair. They had been preparing a future together. Raymond watched my expression carefully. You want legal action? Not yet. Public exposure? Not yet. He nodded slowly. Then what? I stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Houston. Across the street, one of the glass towers housed Rebecca Morrison's real estate development headquarters. From my office, I could see several of the executive floors glowing against the night skyline. People like Daniel and Rebecca believe betrayal is just a chapter, I said quietly. Something they apologize for, survive, and eventually move past. Raymond crossed his arms. And you? I'm going to show them it's the entire story. He studied me for a moment. How far are we going with this? All the way. Raymond didn't ask what that meant. He already knew. Then we start with information, he said. I want everything. Who helped them hide the affair? What they planned for the future, and every weakness in Rebecca's business operations. Raymond gave a small nod. Understood. Later that evening, I drove to Daniel's sister Diane's house, where Ethan had been staying temporarily. I found him sitting in the guest bedroom, surrounded by textbooks and college application papers. He looked up when I entered. Hey, how's physics? He groaned. I hate it. But you're still maintaining a perfect GPA. He gave a tired smile. That's the only way you'd still love me. I sat on the edge of the bed. That's not true. He shrugged. Maybe not, but it helps. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan asked quietly, Did you file for custody? Yes. He nodded. I told Dad I want to live with you. I appreciate that, I said gently, but it may get complicated. Everything already is. He hesitated before adding something else. Dad's telling people you're becoming obsessed with revenge. I studied him carefully. Do you believe that? Ethan looked conflicted. I think you're angry. I'm precise, I corrected. He tilted his head slightly. You're different. No, I said quietly. I'm exactly who I've always been. Later that night, I met Raymond at a quiet bar outside the city center. He slid another folder across the table. This one's bigger. I opened it. Inside were construction safety reports, insurance claims, and internal company emails from Rebecca's firm. Do you remember a contractor named Miguel Santos? Raymond asked. I nodded. Scaffolding collapsed last year, officially ruled an accident. Raymond pointed to a chain of emails. These say otherwise. According to the documents, Rebecca had been warned about multiple safety violations weeks before the accident. Fixing them would have delayed construction and cost her company millions. So she ignored them, I said quietly. Raymond nodded. And when the collapse happened, the reports were buried. Miguel Santos had died that day. He left behind a wife and 3 children. I closed the folder slowly. Does anyone else know about this? Not yet. Raymond hesitated before adding something else. There's another development. What? He slid a photograph across the table. My eyes narrowed. It was Olivia, sitting in a private dining room at Capitol Grill. Across the table from her sat Rebecca Morrison. They were deep in conversation. How long was the meeting? I asked. 1 hour and 12 minutes. Did they argue? No. Did Rebecca offer her something? Raymond tapped another page. Rebecca offered Olivia a position at her company. My daughter. For the first time that evening, real emotion flickered through me. Not anger. Concern. Get me the security footage, I said. The next morning, I visited a luxury watch boutique downtown. The owner, Gloria, had known me for nearly 20 years. I'm looking for a graduation gift, I told her, for my daughter. She brought out an elegant Patek Philippe watch, $15,000. As she wrapped the box, she hesitated. I think I saw Olivia here last week. My gaze remained neutral. With Rebecca Morrison. She smiled politely. Rebecca bought the same model. A graduation gift, she said. I examined the watch carefully. I'll take this one as well. Gloria nodded and began preparing the engraving. When she returned, I added something quietly. Gloria, in 20 years of working together, have I ever given you a reason to doubt my judgment? She looked surprised. Never. I placed the payment card on the counter. Then I suggest you reconsider any future business partnerships with Rebecca Morrison. Her smile faded slightly. My lease renewal with her company is next month. Diversify your options, I said calmly. Then I left. Across the city, Daniel sat in his lawyer's office reviewing the divorce documents. The situation was already beginning to unravel. 3 of Rebecca's largest investors had suddenly withdrawn from a major development project. Millions in funding vanished overnight. The timing was not accidental. Rebecca understood that immediately. She's starting, Daniel muttered. Rebecca paced her penthouse office, speaking urgently to her financial advisor. Move the liquid assets offshore, she ordered. Accelerate the merger with Barrett Construction. But their offer undervalues your company by 30%. I don't care. She stopped pacing and stared out the window. Just do it. Then she added one final instruction. And find anything you can use against Melissa Chen. That evening, Olivia came to my apartment. She stood in the doorway, clearly nervous. You know I met with Rebecca, she said immediately. I know. She looked relieved and frustrated at the same time. She offered me a job. Yes. She said you're trying to destroy her. I poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to her. What do you think? Olivia stared at the glass. I think she betrayed you. But she also supported my career when you pushed me harder than anyone else. I nodded slowly. So you're considering her offer? Silence. That was answer enough. I walked to my desk and returned with a small box. I placed it in front of her. Inside was the identical watch, engraved. Integrity is the only true legacy. Olivia read the words silently, then looked up. What are you going to do to Rebecca? I held her gaze. The question isn't what I will do. It's what she already did to herself. Olivia frowned. What do you mean? I leaned back in my chair. Ask her about Miguel Santos. Who? The contractor who died on her site last year. Olivia's eyes widened slowly. I finished my drink. Choose your loyalties carefully, I said quietly, because I never forget the people who stand against me, even if they are my own blood. And by midnight that night, the framework of everything that would happen next was already in place. Not emotional, not reckless, methodical. The same process I used when reconstructing buildings after catastrophic structural failure. First, identify the weaknesses, then remove the compromised elements, and finally rebuild something stronger from the ruins. Daniel and Rebecca still believed this was just a divorce. They had no idea they were standing at the edge of a complete collapse. For weeks after that night, everything in my life continued moving forward with ruthless precision. Investigations progressed. Financial records accumulated. Legal documents stacked higher on Nora Harrington's desk. From the outside, it looked like control. Inside, something far more complicated was happening. Because no matter how disciplined you are, there comes a moment when the weight of betrayal settles fully into your chest. And when it does, even the strongest foundations begin to shake. The moment arrived on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was alone in my downtown apartment reviewing construction plans when my phone vibrated. It was Olivia. Can we talk? She asked. Her voice sounded strained. Come over. She arrived 30 minutes later. The moment she stepped inside, I noticed the watch, the one Rebecca had bought her, the one I had seen in Gloria's store. She caught me looking at it and instinctively turned her wrist slightly away. That small movement said everything. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. I met Rebecca again. I assumed you would. Her eyes flickered with frustration. You're not even going to ask why? I already know why. She leaned forward. She offered me a division leadership role in her company. That's generous. Stop doing that, she snapped. Doing what? Acting like none of this affects you. I studied her carefully. You think it doesn't? You're dismantling everything, she said. Dad's life, Rebecca's company. Good, I replied calmly. Her jaw tightened. You're proving exactly what they said. And what is that? That you're becoming obsessed with destroying them. The words hung in the air. For the first time, something sharp moved through my chest. Not anger. Something closer to disappointment. You think consequences are destruction? I think revenge is. This isn't revenge. It looks like it. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Then Olivia spoke again, quieter this time. Dad said you've always been like this. Like what? Unforgiving. That word hit deeper than she realized, because it was true. I had spent my entire life believing loyalty was the most important structure in any relationship. And once broken, it could never truly be repaired. Olivia exhaled slowly. Rebecca told me something. My voice remained steady. What did she say? She said you're doing this because you can't control what happened. A faint smile crossed my face. Rebecca has always misunderstood me. Then explain it. I don't need control, I said quietly. I need truth. Olivia shook her head. You're not hearing me. She hesitated before continuing. Dad still loves you. The words landed strangely. Not painful, just distant. Love isn't relevant, I said. Olivia stood abruptly from the table. See? That's exactly the problem. Her voice cracked with emotion. You treat relationships like engineering projects. I didn't respond, because there was truth in that accusation. She grabbed her jacket. Maybe Rebecca's right. What about? that you don't know how to forgive. She walked toward the door, then stopped. You know what the worst part is? What? You're going to win. Her voice broke slightly, but we're all losing. Then she left. The door closed behind her with a quiet finality, and suddenly the apartment felt too silent, too empty. For the first time since the hospital, I allowed myself to sit in that silence, to feel what had been building beneath everything else. My husband had betrayed me. My closest friend had helped him do it. And now my own daughter was questioning the only principles that had held my life together. I poured a glass of whiskey and stood at the window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the evening light. Buildings I had designed, projects that carried my name, achievements that once meant everything. But in that moment, they felt strangely hollow. Because success cannot replace loyalty, and architecture cannot rebuild a family. For a brief moment, a dangerous thought surfaced. What if Olivia was right? What if my refusal to forgive would cost me more than Daniel's betrayal ever had? I closed my eyes. Then another memory surfaced. My father standing in our doorway 20 years after he abandoned us, asking for forgiveness, talking about second chances. I had looked him in the eye and said something I had never regretted. Some choices are permanent. Some betrayals cannot be undone. When I opened my eyes again, the doubt had disappeared. Because this was not about revenge. It was about reality. And reality has consequences. Still, that night, as I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by silence, I understood something I hadn't admitted before. Victory would not bring back what had been destroyed, even if Daniel lost everything, even if Rebecca's empire collapsed, even if the truth came out. My family would never be the same again. That was the true cost of betrayal. Not anger, not punishment, irreversible damage. And in that quiet moment, standing in front of the city I helped build, I allowed myself to feel something rare. Grief. Not for Daniel. Not for Rebecca. But for the life I once believed was unbreakable. 3 days after Olivia walked out of my apartment, I received a phone call that shifted the entire direction of what was happening. The name on the screen surprised me. Oliver Mitchell, Rebecca Morrison's ex-husband. We had met only a handful of times over the years. Charity events, industry gatherings, the occasional holiday dinner when Rebecca had still been married. Their divorce 5 years earlier had been messy and very public. After that, Oliver Mitchell had disappeared from most social circles. Now he was calling me, I answered. Melissa Chen. There was a pause, then a composed male voice. I believe we should talk. About Rebecca? Yes. His tone was calm, but I could hear something underneath it. History. Where? I asked. My ranch outside the city. 2 hours later, I was driving along a quiet stretch of Texas countryside. Oliver Mitchell's ranch sat behind a long iron gate and a wide gravel driveway that cut through open pasture land. He greeted me on the front porch, tall, composed, dressed in riding boots and a simple white shirt. The kind of man who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had already survived a war. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I'm curious. He nodded and gestured toward the house. Inside, the living room overlooked rolling fields and horse paddocks. The quiet was almost unsettling compared to the noise of Houston. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to me. I heard about the affair, he said. Houston talks. I'm not surprised. His eyes studied me carefully. You look calmer than I expected. I'm precise, I replied. That made him smile faintly. Yes, Rebecca used to say that about you. We sat across from each other. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned back in his chair. Do you know why Rebecca and I divorced? Infidelity? Among other things. His gaze sharpened slightly. But that wasn't the real reason. What was? Money. He stood and walked toward a large bookshelf against the wall. For a moment, he ran his fingers along the wood paneling. Then he pushed on one section. A hidden compartment opened. Inside was a small metal box. He removed a flash drive and returned to the table. My attorney discovered something during the divorce proceedings, he said. Too late to use it in court. He placed the flash drive on the table between us. Rebecca had been hiding offshore accounts. How much? Millions. I raised an eyebrow. That's significant. More than that. Oliver Mitchell leaned forward slightly. Some of it wasn't her money. I understood immediately. Embezzlement. Or something very close to it. He watched my reaction carefully. I always suspected she'd eventually destroy herself, Oliver said quietly. But I didn't expect Daniel Chen to be standing beside her when it happened. Neither did I. He studied me for another long moment. What exactly are you planning? Justice. With or without me? He considered that answer. Then he slid the flash drive toward me. Take it. You're sure? I've been waiting 5 years for the right moment. He smiled slightly. I think it's arrived. Back in Houston that evening, Raymond and I reviewed the data. The information confirmed everything he had already discovered. Offshore transfers, shell companies, illegal financial routing. It also revealed something even more serious. Rebecca had used those shell companies to funnel construction funds through multiple channels before returning them to personal accounts. Money laundering. Raymond leaned back in his chair. This could destroy her. It will. He studied me. You're not just dismantling her business. No. You're sending her to prison. That depends on what she does next. I stood and walked to the window. Below us, Houston moved through another quiet night. Traffic lights changing, office buildings glowing, a city built on ambition and risk. Rebecca had always believed she was smarter than everyone around her. Now she was about to discover the difference between confidence and consequence. Meanwhile, across town, Rebecca Morrison was pacing inside her penthouse office. Her financial advisor had just delivered the worst news yet. 3 investors pulled out today. Which ones? Matsuda Group, Wellington Partners, Crown Holdings. Rebecca stopped pacing. Those were not ordinary investors. Those were connections she had gained through my professional network years earlier. This isn't coincidence, she said quietly. No. Her advisor hesitated. Someone is targeting the company. Rebecca already knew who. Melissa Chen. She walked to the window and stared out at the skyline. For the first time in months, real concern crept into her voice. She's starting. Across the city, Daniel sat in his own lawyer's office, reviewing the latest divorce filing. The papers shook slightly in his hands. She wants full custody of Ethan. His lawyer nodded. She also submitted documentation showing your wife missed multiple family events during the last 2 years. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. This is getting ugly. The lawyer looked at him carefully. It already is. That same evening, my attorney, Nora Harrington, called me. The financial forensic review is complete, she said. And? Daniel transferred $342,000 into separate accounts over the past 18 months. So they were preparing to leave. Yes. Nora paused. You're building a devastating case. That's the intention. You realize this will destroy them. I looked out over the city again. They destroyed themselves. Nora sighed quietly. Melissa. Yes? Once this begins publicly, there's no stopping it. I know. And you're certain you want to go that far? I thought about Daniel, about Rebecca, about the hospital room, about Ethan crying in the foyer of our home. Yes. The next morning, Raymond delivered the final piece of information. Rebecca's company knew about the safety violations before Miguel Santos died. He placed the documents on my desk. They buried the reports. I read the emails slowly, line by line. Every message confirmed the same thing. They knew. And they chose profit anyway. How many children did Santos leave behind, I asked. 3. Does his wife still live in Houston? Yes. I closed the folder. Then I looked at Raymond. Prepare the full report. For the authorities? Yes. And the media? I paused. Not yet. Raymond nodded. So what happens first? I leaned back in my chair. The truth. Because once that truth surfaced, the structure Rebecca and Daniel had built together would collapse completely. And unlike a building, some ruins cannot be rebuilt. 6 months after the night in the hospital, the consequences finally began falling into place. By then, the divorce case had already become a quiet storm moving through Houston's business circles. People in the industry had started whispering about Rebecca Morrison. Investors were pulling away. Bankers were asking uncomfortable questions. and journalists had begun noticing unusual financial patterns in one of the city's most aggressive development firms. The collapse didn't happen all at once. Like most structural failures, it started with small fractures. Then the pressure reached a point where everything gave way. The courtroom. The custody hearing took place on a gray Thursday morning. Ethan sat beside me in the courtroom, now 17, his posture stiff and composed in a way that reminded me painfully of myself at his age. Across the aisle sat Daniel. He looked thinner than the last time I had seen him. Tired. Rebecca was not there. Their relationship, I had learned, had begun deteriorating weeks earlier as the investigations around her company intensified. The judge reviewed the documents for nearly 30 minutes. Evidence of Daniel's long absences. Financial transfers. Testimony from Ethan about missed events during the last 2 years. Finally, the judge removed her glasses and looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Chen, your actions have created instability in this household. Daniel lowered his head slightly. The judge turned toward me. Primary physical custody of Ethan Chen will be granted to his mother. She paused. Mr. Chen will retain visitation rights under supervision until Ethan reaches 18. Beside me, Ethan released a breath he had been holding for weeks. Across the aisle, Daniel closed his eyes. The gavel struck once. The marriage was effectively over. The media explosion. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already waiting. The story had begun spreading the previous week when anonymous documents reached several major business journalists. Internal emails, financial transfers, construction safety violations. Every document pointed toward Rebecca Morrison's company. Within 48 hours, the story exploded across Houston. Headlines appeared everywhere. Real estate developer accused of safety cover-up. Money laundering investigation expands. Contractor death under new scrutiny. Rebecca's investors began abandoning her immediately. 3 major projects were suspended. 2 banks froze company credit lines. Regulatory agencies launched formal investigations. For the first time since I had known her, Rebecca Morrison was losing control of the narrative. Rebecca's collapse. 3 weeks later, Rebecca called me. I almost didn't answer. Almost. When I did, her voice sounded completely different from the confident developer who had once dominated boardrooms. Melissa, please. I said nothing. I know you're behind this. No, I replied calmly. You are. The truth is coming out. Her breathing grew uneven. You're destroying everything. You destroyed it. There was a long silence. Finally, she whispered something that almost sounded like desperation. I never meant for it to go this far. But betrayal always goes further than the people committing it expect. The choice. A few days later, Rebecca requested a private meeting. We met at the Metropolitan Club, a quiet dining room overlooking downtown Houston. She looked exhausted. Her once perfectly controlled appearance had slipped slightly, dark circles under her eyes, tension in every movement. She sat across from me and folded her hands together. What do you want? She asked. I answered simply. Confession. Her eyes narrowed. That's not enough for you. It is. What exactly do you want me to confess to? I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the safety reports and financial transfers. Emails she thought no one would ever see. Her face drained of color as she read them. You have 24 hours, I said quietly. To do what? Publicly accept responsibility. And if I don't? Then I will provide the full documentation to federal investigators. Rebecca stared at the papers. You destroy me. I held her gaze. You destroyed Miguel Santos's family. That ended the conversation. The press conference. The following afternoon, Rebecca Morrison stood in front of a crowd of reporters. I watched from the back of the room. Cameras flashed. Microphones hovered inches from her face. She looked pale, but composed. My company failed to properly address safety violations on a Houston construction site, she said. I accept full responsibility. The room erupted with questions. Are you admitting criminal liability? Yes. Will you cooperate with investigators? Yes. Did anyone else in your company know? No. Then she said something unexpected. My colleague Daniel Chen had no knowledge of these violations or financial misconduct. I understood what she had done. She had protected him. Even now.
after everything.
When the conference ended, Rebecca looked up and spotted me in the crowd. For a brief moment, our eyes met. There was no anger in her expression, only resignation. She had lost. And she knew it. Restoring what could be restored. That evening, I drove to a small house on the east side of the city. Miguel Santos's widow opened the door cautiously. Her name was Elena. She looked confused when I introduced myself. "I'm not sure why you're here," she said. "I came to explain what's about to happen." We sat at her kitchen table while her 3 children played quietly in the next room. I told her Rebecca had confessed, that a civil settlement would follow, a trust fund for the children's education, her home fully paid. Elena looked overwhelmed. "But you didn't cause Miguel's death," she said. "No," I replied. "But I helped expose the truth. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoring what can still be saved." Daniel's collapse was quieter. Rebecca's scandal destroyed her company, but Daniel lost something else. His reputation, his marriage, his family. After the custody ruling, he moved into a small apartment near the edge of the city. He stopped attending industry events. Several of his business partnerships dissolved quietly. When we spoke about Ethan, our conversations remained brief and controlled. There was nothing left to say. The foundation of our life together had already crumbled. 1 year later, 1 year after the hospital revelation, I stood on the observation deck of my newest building. The Houston skyline stretched endlessly in every direction. Behind me, I heard footsteps. "Rebecca's sentencing is tomorrow," Olivia said. She had come to visit from graduate school. 5 to 7 years, she added quietly. I nodded. "Justice for Miguel Santos." Olivia studied me. "And for you?" I shook my head slightly. "No." Justice had never been about me, because by the time the truth surfaced, the real damage had already been done. Families don't collapse like buildings. They collapse slowly. And when they do, nothing ever returns to what it once was. Rebuilding. 1 year after everything collapsed, my life looked very different. Not broken, but rebuilt. Like a building that has survived an earthquake, still standing, yet forever marked by the damage it once endured. That afternoon, I stood alone on the observation deck of my newest project, a 40-story glass tower overlooking downtown Houston. The wind moved softly across the open platform while the city stretched endlessly beneath me. From this height, everything looked peaceful, orderly, predictable. Architecture has always had that illusion. Structures appear permanent until something unexpected tests them. Behind me, footsteps approached. I turned. It was Olivia. She had flown in from California the night before. "Rebecca's sentencing is tomorrow," she said quietly. I nodded. 5 to 7 years, according to the news. "Justice," I replied. "Justice for Miguel Santos." Olivia studied me carefully. "And for you?" I looked back toward the skyline. "No." Justice had never been about me. Before Olivia could respond, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, I answered. "This is Melissa Chen." The voice on the other end sounded urgent. "Ma'am, this is Memorial Hospital." My stomach tightened. "Your son Ethan has been in a serious car accident." For a moment, the city below blurred. "What is his condition?" "He's alive, but he's in surgery. There's possible spinal trauma." I was already moving. Olivia followed me without a word. The hospital again. Hospitals have a way of making time feel suspended. The same fluorescent lighting, the same antiseptic air, the same long hallways filled with quiet anxiety. When I arrived, I saw someone already sitting in the waiting area. Daniel. His face was pale, eyes red from exhaustion. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stood. "They said surgery is almost finished." I nodded. That was the first conversation we had shared in months. 3 words. No anger, no accusations. Only fear for our child. The surgeon finally appeared nearly 2 hours later. "Ethan is stable," he said. Both of us released the breath we had been holding. "But there was spinal trauma," he continued. "We won't know the full extent until he regains consciousness. Recovery could take weeks, possibly months. Physical therapy would be necessary. But he was alive." And in that moment, Nothing else mattered. An uneasy truce. For the next 3 weeks, Daniel and I existed in a strange, fragile truce. We rarely spoke directly. When we did, it was about Ethan's treatment, medication schedules, rehabilitation plans, doctor consultations. Sometimes we passed each other in the hospital hallway without saying a word, but for Ethan's sake, the hostility between us remained buried. It wasn't forgiveness. It was necessity. Eventually, Ethan woke. The spinal injury was serious, but not permanent. Months of therapy would follow, but he would walk again. When the doctor delivered that news, Daniel sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed. For the first time since our divorce began, I saw tears in his eyes. Not regret for losing me, but relief for his son. Life moves forward. 3 months later, I received a handwritten letter at my office. The envelope carried a familiar return address. Daniel. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was uneven, but deliberate. He did not ask for forgiveness. He knew me well enough to understand that was impossible. Instead, the letter asked for something else. Let the children love both of us. He wrote about the pressure Olivia and Ethan were feeling, how they often felt they were betraying one parent simply by speaking to the other. He wasn't asking to rebuild our marriage. He wasn't asking for friendship. Only space for the children to maintain their relationships without guilt. At the bottom of the letter, he wrote something that stayed with me. You always believed truth mattered more than anything. So here is mine. What I did was unforgivable, but our children shouldn't spend the rest of their lives paying for my mistake. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't reply. But that evening, when I called Ethan at his college dorm, I asked a question I had never asked before. How often do you talk to your father? There was a long pause on the phone. Wait, Ethan said cautiously. Are you actually asking about Dad? I'm asking about your relationship with him. Another silence. Then he laughed softly. Who are you and what have you done with Melissa Chen? I allowed myself a small smile. Later that week, I texted Olivia. I was scheduled to speak at an architecture symposium at Stanford. Dinner while I'm in town? She responded a minute later. Just us? I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I typed back. Your choice. The lesson. Forgiveness never came. It never would. Some betrayals fracture the foundation of a life so deeply that they cannot be repaired. Daniel and Rebecca had destroyed something permanent. Trust. And once trust collapses, rebuilding it exactly as it was becomes impossible. But life, like architecture, allows another option. Reconstruction. Not identical, not perfect, but functional. Stronger in some ways because the weaknesses are now visible. One evening, nearly 2 years after the hospital revelation, I stood again on the observation deck of that same skyscraper. The city lights stretched endlessly beneath me. Olivia had returned to Houston for a visit. Ethan was finishing his final semester of college. Daniel had moved to California, starting a quieter life far from the city where everything fell apart. The past remained exactly what it was. Unchangeable, unforgivable. But something else had taken its place. Acceptance, not warmth. Not reconciliation, just the recognition that our children deserve the freedom to love both parents without carrying the weight of our mistakes. I had taught them something important, that loyalty matters, that betrayal has consequences, that actions shape the structures of our lives in ways we cannot always undo. But I also learned something in the aftermath. Even after catastrophic collapse, life does not end, it rebuilds. Different. Scarred, but still standing. And sometimes that is enough.